Today, we are talking about the iconic, controversial fashion brand Vitamins. Playing the Vitamin song.
That's right. We're talking about Vetements, aka Vetements, the Georgian turned French, the fashion label that in the mid 2010s set the world of fashion on fire. For real.
How did we land on talking about Vetements? Why not some other brand? Set the tone?
Because hold on, I gotta get my. Sorry, guys. If you're just listening to this, we're gonna edit this out in post, even though this is a live stream. But I just want to make sure I'm getting my note right.
He's got to get
because if you guys are curious, you should follow me on Instagram. It's at Christian_Shabetta. That's SCIBETTA. And I do a poll whenever we do our episode the day before, and I want to get your guys' input on what brand we will talk about. And if I ever figure out my office, figure out my life, figure out my job, figure out my X, Y, and Z, hopefully we'll start like putting those polls out further and expanding. But we want to get your input. So fans decided.
The people have spoken. They want to hear about Big Daddy V, Vetements. So let's set the stage here. Let's talk about let's start from square one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Vetements, it sounds like a real hoity-toity French kind of name. Not in my country, you know.
Not my president.
People have spoken. We got to talk about them. But I know it sounds very hoity-toity. Vetements actually just means clothing. You had no idea,
French.
did you?
It just translates to clothing in French.
Right.
That's the only reason I've ever been able to know how it's pronounced, because it's just a normal word. Otherwise, it would be Vetements.
And it's actually
that's kind of weird.
Fantastic brand name, because it says a hell of a lot about the ethos of the brand and what they were all about, at least when they started. But the brand was started by a pair of Georgian brothers, not America, Georgia, right? You're
not America, Georgia, dumbass.
Georgia, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was the two brothers, and they had kind of like a collective of collaborators around them. But the figureheads, right, are the two brothers. One of them is Demna Gvasalia. The other is Guram Gvasalia.
The artist formerly known as Demna Gvasalia.
Formerly, right? He dropped the Gvasalia. And I don't know if it's a coincidence that the one with the more accessible and less Middle Eastern sounding name became the more successful one.
His words, not mine.
A little bit of edge to start off the podcast.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more, because the story, at least as far until recently, the story was, to my understanding, mostly revolving around this little guy named Demna. What's his background?
So he started off. He went to the Antwerp. What's the full name of the school? The Royal something.
Royal Academy.
Yeah, just this little school that nobody else other than Demna has come out of. That's not true. The Antwerp Six, iconic fashion designers.
Everybody goes there.
So he had this big pedigree. He goes off to Maison Martin Margiela. He hones his trade over there, learns a lot about deconstructive fashion, things like that. Then he heads over to a little brand called Louis Vuitton. And finally, he leaves to start up his own brand, Vetements, with his brother Guram. So he has a lot of fashion experience under his belt by this point, and a lot of kind of behind-the-scenes cred built up. So that, I would say, makes it almost all the more interesting that the brand he started was kind of designed to tear it all down.
Yeah, this could be one of those false memories, but I remember reading an interview of Demna or in the early days, and him having basically a sentiment that working in fashion, working in the industry, he didn't see the opportunity or the outlet for something that was truly creative or really kind of focused on the art over product. And that was why he started Vetements. And I want Killian to leave because eventually we have to do the spinoff where he has his own show, so he
I'm in
needs to leave.
training. Yeah.
But the kind of the middle 2010s when Vetma really came onto the scene, it was, for anybody who wasn't alive, who doesn't remember, it was a kind of a big major brand. It made huge waves in the fashion industry, primarily because this is kind of like when streetwear was really coming into its own, and this brand really kind of it played into so many ideas that were very compelling for somebody who was super interested in fashion, and very off-putting or crazy or completely inaccessible to people outside of fashion, because these were pieces that looked like normal but uglier to like a normal person, and it was like the absurdity was there from the jump. And I think that the name Vetements, clothes, plays into a lot of it. I think that the ethos of Vetements, especially in the early years, was Demna kind of pulling from both his childhood and from all these kind of inspirations and aesthetics that he felt like made up just regular ass clothing in Europe, and then taking it and basically applying his experiences at Margiela to build these really interestingly constructed garments.
I think that's exactly right. I think there's kind of two sides to it that mesh together into a pretty cohesive whole, which is that on the one side, you have this very like Eastern European, harsh, brutal kind of stuff, like this Elite thing. It's very, or like the hard shoulders on a piece like this, the May the Bridges I Burn Light the Way hoodie with these kind of football padded shoulders. You've got this very harsh side of things. And then you have this ironic side of things, which I'm sure we'll get into more later, where it's just sending up and deconstructing the entire idea of luxury fashion. And this brand, they brought in an entire kind of wave of, I think they were calling it like post-Soviet fashion. Of course, you've got guys like Gosha Rubchinsky, who walked the runway for one of Vetements' most like grail type pieces, the DHL t-shirt, which I believe is right there.
So for anybody just listening, we put graphics on the screen when we are doing this on YouTube. So be sure to check out the live streams here. But we just saw designer Gosha Rubchinsky with a blink walk down the runway in a what looks like just a regular DHL shirt. And it is basically, right? I mean,
absolutely, that's all it is. And I think that's like the idea of putting on a quote unquote luxury runway, literally a DHL t-shirt, or like a finer constructed material, whatever version of that. And it is begging the question, which was an innovative question at the time, of like, what is luxury fashion, right? Does this DHL t-shirt qualify as a piece of luxury clothing?
And this definitely was a question that was super compelling, more compelling to enthusiasts, like when Demna or when Vetements first came on the scene, because like the whole streetwear question was still basically being sussed out,
decided like in real time, right?
It was real time strategy, where this was a time long ago when people were trying to discern whether or not you would spend hundreds of dollars on a hoodie or on sneakers or any of that stuff, when previously that was seen as psycho. And I think that part of what made Vetements compelling to enthusiasts was the fact that it was really the oddity of constructions, that it was leaning into like this kind of question or gray area of like where do these clothes belong in these contexts? And kind of more than that, just the fact that it was you had to be in the know to understand it. It wasn't. This was before people could even begin to grasp that such a thing would, like, these clothes would exist. Because I remember headlines being like, this hoodie is ugly and it costs too much. And obviously, like, while Demna's been at Balenciaga, he still played to that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But it was like, that was one of the major impacts of it. I think that we can also talk about kind of like what the critics say and like what the criticisms were.
Fair
and I think
point.
one of them was like, this just seems like a friggin' expensive joke. You know,
Yes.
like, are these clothes beautiful or good or wearable? Do people want to wear them? Or is it just worn by like rich brats and people who are spending far too much money on things that are essentially ugly clothing?
Yeah, let me maybe bring up some examples. I literally just searched Vetements t-shirt because pretty much all of their t-shirts are in this sort of realm of design where
Ugliness.
stop copying me. You're not even doing it right. Just be jealous. Call me Vetements or Angel, right? Like all of this, and you can see the retail prices on this stuff ranging, you know, from $350 to $700. And I think for a lot of people, they were asking, is this brand making fun of me? Is this an entire send up or a way to rip off luxury fashion fans by trying to pass something that is super dumb off as actually really cool in order to just suck money out of them, essentially?
And the question still remains. We do not know. But
We do not.
I think that, and I've said this in a past episode when we were talking about kind of Demna as a designer and whether or not we respect him or hate him. And I've said that for me personally, it was when he started working at Balenciaga, when he took over, where I started to truly appreciate him and kind of value him as what I think one of the best designers of kind of our generation.
Yeah.
And that was primarily because within the confines of Balenciaga, he took so much of his design sentimentality and applied it into like a more traditional and kind of codified house. And that forced less jokes to get through and more like just more and more kind of compelling silhouettes and design and structure. And that's when I really started to like him. But ultimately, it still begs the question of like, but there are so many pieces that are iconic and were maybe even more experimental from Vetements. And before we started like the stream, I was talking about like the two-sided hoodie. I think is one of those pieces that I think is like an iconic Vetements rail.
Let's see here.
Jamie, pull that
up. Boom.
This one. So it's like on screen, we're looking at a black hoodie that says Vetements basically on both sides. And one side is like a fake champion. The other side's kind of like a heavy metal kind of logo. But they played far further into that in the future. But what was kind of interesting about this hoodie is it literally could be worn both ways. There was like a hole. There were like two neck holes in a way. So you could flip it, wear it one way, flip it, wear it the other way. And there's something kind of really cool about how these pieces were designed, as well as, you know, other stuff that people like.
And I'm trying to find an example. The internet just like isn't playing nice with me, but I think, and this is an issue that Demna has had at Balenciaga as well, but I think it was maybe even more so with Vetements, is that the whole rigmarole around the ironic or kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff overwhelms the more actual like garment making side of it, because even I think if you go back to the earliest Vetements collections, there are like legit pieces dropped in key moments in all of it where you just realize like, oh, that's a really well-made piece of clothing with a really interesting design right there. And those things are often kind of left on the back burner as people focus on the more in-your-face elements of anything that Demna's worked on.
Yeah. And I think that is definitely a criticism, and it's probably like what a lot of people were thinking at the time. And I keep going back to the time 2016-ish, because that's definitely like, that's when Vetements was like the brand that everybody was talking about.
Yeah.
And to its credit, you know, we talk a lot about a lot of brands on this show, but few brands are as capable to break onto the scene and really occupy the consciousness of like the fashion community in the way that Vetements did, and
Yeah.
almost certainly kind of changed the calculus for a lot of brands in terms of kind of like what would be compelling and what would be successful financially.
For sure.
Because this was essentially like an art house type of brand that was killing it.